couple of years ago, this is probably about 10, 15 years ago, if you guys remember, when they first took over the new school district headquarters, when they moved from downtown 21st and Winter to Broad and Spring Garden, and they renovated the current school district of Philadelphia administrative headquarters, they made that place is beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And the sad thing about it was they got almost no pushback from any black community stakeholders. I'm talking preachers, politicians, community-based organizations, or parents. There was no pushback for how do you create an administrative center that is much better looking, with much better amenities and conveniences than the schools in which our children live. The fact that they did not spend that money on renovating the schools and instead spent that money on creating this multi-million-dollar place of work for people who don't do much was absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that the community said nothing, I believe, really caused a even worse relationship between the white power structure of Philadelphia and Philadelphia's parents, because we said nothing about the fact they created a state-of-the-art working environment for themselves without improving the schools for our children.
Do you think that many parents may not want to say anything because they don't want their child to be targeted, by the system or get drawn into the system?
I'm not even sure if many of them knew about it. I don't even know how many cared, to be honest with you, because working in the school system, our parents have had such adverse relationships with the school system that for a lot of them, they've created a psychological wall where they just try to stay as far away from the school system as possible. They almost see it like prison, and rightly so. But what our parents need to understand is your child is there. So you cannot desensitize yourself too much to what's going on in the school system, because that means you're basically turning your back on your child. But let us be clear. The school district, all school districts in America that serve black children, they depend and they expect and they rely upon the apathetic, disinterested, and depressed single black mother. They literally depend on it. That school system could not operate the way it's operating if parents were involved or cared a little bit more than they do. And I'm not saying that black parents don't care about their children. I'm saying they don't care enough to fight for the changes that should have been made. Black parents across America, but again, we're talking about Philadelphia. Number one, parents should have fought for all of the industrial building trades to be put back into Philadelphia's high schools. Right now, you got Randolph Skills Center. They still have a couple trades. I think Dobbins may still have a couple trades. Saul may still have a couple trades. You have no more than 5 schools in Philadelphia that still have a respectable and diverse trade program. Most of them just have cosmetology and barbering. None of them have a program that will take you from A to Z, which includes you sitting for your state license and passing that test and going right into work or opening your business. That's one thing we should have fought for. Another thing we should have fought for is improved school buildings. Our children are learning in schools, in many cases, that are 100 years old or close to 100 years old. Number 3, they should have fought for more black male principals and more black male teachers. Okay, that's another thing that they should have fought for. Number 4, they should have fought for a moratorium on special ed, where there was a timeout. No more kids are being put in special ed until we evaluate this system, assess this system, diagnose the system, and reconstruct the system. Special education is a cancer that is destroying black children.
Do you happen to know what the percentage of black children in special ed as opposed to white children in special ed?
Oh, wow. Disproportionate in every category. First of all, black boys basically own the emotional disturbance label. Let me say that again. When you talk about the emotionally disturbed child, black boys basically own that label. Now, there's white kids and Latinos, of course, but nationally, more than 50% of all ED children are black male, which is interesting because black children, black boys, are less than 10% of the entire population. So how can it be 50% of the ED? And when you go to learning disability, same thing. Intellectual disability, same thing. Other health impairments for ADHD, same thing. When I say school to prison pipeline, I need you guys to really understand that the school is a mirror of the prison system. And the emotional support class is where you send black boys until they're old enough to drop out or go to jail.
Well, do you think that they are saying that they have more blacks in special ed because they're the most trouble in the population?
Have more blacks in special ed because the white teachers who make up the bulk of America's teachers don't have faith in them, don't want to teach them at all. I mean, let's be honest now. The white teacher in the ghetto is only there because she couldn't get a job in the suburb, or she's only there for 5 years so she can get her Barack Obama student loan forgiveness. Because, you know, after 5 years in the ghetto school, your student loans is paid off.
Wow.
You understand?
You get combat pay, huh?
Oh, absolutely. So for a lot of teachers, you know, it's like, hey, why go anywhere else if I could get all my loans paid off here? And then after they get their 5-year loan forgiveness, then they go to the suburbs with increased stature because they survived the inner city school.
Well, let's say, for instance, now I know that you are building your own Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy, but let's say just hypothetically, if you were superintendent of Philadelphia schools, what would you do differently?
In addition to the points that I've already made, we will bring the trades back. Okay, the teachers in the class would have to look like the children that they're teaching. There would be a moratorium on special ed. There would be an extensive school rehabilitation project. Okay. Also, there would be community control of the public schools, which means that the community itself, although they may not have the expertise to make certain decisions, they do have the wisdom and the insight, the intelligence and the common sense to confirm the decisions that the experts make. So in other words, if the school district recommends 2 finalists with equal qualifications to be principal at a certain school, it would be the parents and the community themselves who would confirm that person. It would be the parents and community themselves who would confirm the superintendent. It would be the parents and communities themselves who would confirm the regional superintendents. You need to have community control because nobody knows better than a parent whether or not somebody genuinely cares about their children. Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem I had in the school district of Philadelphia, and I see it all across the country when I travel, is nobody cares about whether or not the people being hired actually care about the children they're going to be working with. Like, isn't it interesting that you're never even asked when you show up to the school district of Philadelphia to be a substitute teacher or a permanent teacher? Nobody ever asks you whether or not you care about black children.
Wow. Should they? But should they?
They don't ask you that. No, sir. That is not a part of the interview. No, sir. If you got your degree, you got your FBI clearance, you got your criminal clearance, you got your resume. As long as your paperwork is in order, you can hate black kids and get a job at the school district of Philadelphia or any other predominantly black school district. Caring about black children is not a prerequisite to work with black children.
So that's like a psychological background, the same thing that should apply to police. They should hire police.
Absolutely.
And they say, do you like
psychological background check?
That's right.
And there is no psychological background check. That's why you see all these cases every year. There's not a year that goes by when you don't see a case about a teacher who called a kid the N-word, okay, or said something, black kids can't learn or they're all stupid, or, this happens every year. You say, now we know white people are racist, but why is it that the teachers, are constantly being exposed for this type of behavior? That's because there's no psychological background check on being a teacher.
I said we got several callers on the phone line waiting to jump in. All right, we have another caller calling in all the way from Germany. Good evening, caller. What's your first name?
This is Rick calling you long distance.
Good. Welcome to New Worldview. You have a question or comment for our guest, Dr. UmarJohnson?
I have a question for Dr. Umar. My question is simply this. I've listened to you attack the school system and the police and the prison system, and I'm wondering how soon you're going to get your school up and running.
Okay. Interesting words when you say you listen to me attack the police as if the police are beyond being evaluated, as well as the school system. But to answer your question, we are still in the process of renovating right now. God willing, if all goes well, the Honorable Marcus Garvey Elementary School should be ready for a community conference and grand opening at the end of the summer. I'm currently looking at the last week in March, first week in September. I want to give the renovations as much opportunity as possible to be completed I do not want another summer to go by without the elementary school and the Nat Turner Gymnasium being completed. So that's our plan right now. We have about 6 months to meet that goal. God willing, we will meet that goal. But respectfully, I don't attack the police or the school district. I evaluate, I assess, and I constructively criticize. But if the word attack is the word that has to be used for my opinions regarding the white power structure, then I'm willing to accept it.
I was going to ask Rick, could you clarify what is it that you think that he may have said that would meet the standard of attack?
Qualify as an attack.
Okay, you can play on my word. I will accept him being a critic of these institutions, but I have a second question. If you are confronted with mentally disabled students, how will you deal with them in your school setting?
Well, when you say mentally disabled, being as that I'm a certified school psychologist, I would probably need a little bit more clarity on what you mean by that. For example, some people would consider a child who's classified as learning disabled as potential mental disability. A kid with ADHD as a potential mental disability. If we look at the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Manual of Mental Illnesses, there's over 400 different conditions in there. The point that I'm making is every disability, after we first ascertain whether or not the disability is appropriate and legitimate, because that's the first issue. You have to make sure the label that the child is walking around with is actually a verifiable label. A lot of our kids are labeled just so they can be put out the classroom, put in special ed, and put on medicine. But for those children who do have legitimate disabilities, each disability would require its own treatment plan in order to work with that children. So the way you work with the autistic children will not be the way you work with the intellectually disabled. The way you work with the intellectually disabled is not the way you're going to work with the learning disabled. The way you work with the learning disabled is not going to be the way you work with the ADHD, and you're not going to work with the ADHD the same way you work with the conduct disorder child. So every disability would require its own specific approach in order to help those children. But in my school at FDMG, we plan to have a program specifically for the autistic kids, another program specifically for the emotionally disturbed kids, another program specifically, we have autism, emotional disturbance. We will also have a blind program, a deaf program, and serious mental illness, which could be such things as psychotic disorders and schizophrenia. We won't have those the first year, but we will definitely have them at some point within the school.